Sehr herzlich willkommen im Bruno-Kreisky-Forum. Ich begrüße sehr herzlich ebenfalls die Zuseherinnen und Zuseher des Wiener Stadtsenders W24 und die Zuhörerinnen und Zuhörer des Falterradios. Der zweite Machtantritt von Donald Trump in den Vereinigten Staaten ist ein schwerer Rückschlag für die demokratischen Kräfte, für die Linke, nicht nur in den USA, sondern auch weltweit. Mein Name ist Raimund Löw. Ich spreche in dieser Sendung mit Katrina vanden Heuvel. Sie ist eine der führenden progressiven Publizistinnen der USA. Welcome, Katrina.
Thank you.
Katrina vanden Heuvel ist Herausgeberin und Chefredakteurin der New Yorker Wochenzeitung The Nation. Sie hat Bücher geschrieben, sie schreibt für die Washington Post, die New York Times, den Guardian in London. Sie ist in New York und wir führen dieses Gespräch auf Englisch. Katrina, Trump, second term has just started. How dangerous is what he's saying and also what he has been doing since then for democracy?
It's a very important distinction because what he is saying, he's acting on as well. We saw that within minutes of the inaugural event. He signed 26 executive orders, many of them which contradict, undermine the Constitution. So he's immediately at war with a Constitution that he appears not to respect, which is at the lodestar of the American system. So I think we're at a very dangerous moment in American history. I, however, do believe in the resilience of the American system. I think of January 6th not only as the day of the insurrectionists, who, by the way, in a stunning move, President Trump pardoned. Even some MAGA people were surprised by how quickly that happened. But January 6th was also the day Roosevelt in 1941 gave his For Freedom speech. So I juxtapose those two events, but I do think we're in a very dangerous cycle with Trump, second term, far more disciplined. And also, if your viewers, listeners have followed Project 2025, this was the kind of manifesto of the Trump campaign and administration, written by key leading right-wing groups. And it does seem to be the manifesto and the guide for the first days, certainly, of the Trump administration.
And Trump now has a Republican majority in both houses of Congress on his side. He has a majority in the Supreme Court that's very conservative. Is he himself more radical than he was in the first term?
There's more of a coherent, and I say that with mixed words, mixed meaning. He is far more disciplined. He learned from that first term that he needed to bring in his own people. The chief of staff, for example, in the second administration, this one, is someone who's worked with him for years. So the loyalty factor, which is at the heart often of authoritarian systems, loyalty to the man, not necessarily to the Constitution, seems an abiding principle of this second term. He had different kinds of people in the first term, people I don't admire. John Bolton, for example, the national security hawk who unraveled the arms control structures. But those people were loyal to a system, not to Trump. That is different now. You have people like Stephen Miller, the architect of the immigration policies. And you do have an apparatus ready to politicize the government working system. And of course, we cannot forget, we have not only, how to put it, a conservative, but an extremist court, Supreme Court. And that is not just the fact, Raymond, that we were looking at election night where you have the two houses plus the presidency. Never forget the court. That's the fourth element. But at the same time, the idea that he won a popular mandate, this soaring popular mandate, he won the popular vote by 1.5%. We cannot base a politics of alternatives on that. But he is not, even today, his policies are more popular than he is, which is tricky.
In this Republican majority, the different branches of government, not everybody is following the same line. Not everybody seems to be extremists. There are extremists. You mentioned MAGA, Make America Great Again current, but others are not. How big are these differences, and do you think there is an element of hope in the fact that not everybody is a MAGA fanatic in the Republican Party?
So let me unpack that, if I might. We are a poor country. We have two mainstream political parties. The Democratic Party is a coalition party. The Republican Party has been taken over by Trump to a large extent. I think that's important to recognize. There are Republicans, I was just reading Bill Kristol, of all people, who are opponents, or Steve Schmidt. But they're, kind of critical of Trump in shallow ways, I would say. But for now, the Republican Party is Trump's party. Now, there are outliers in the states and in parts of this country, but people are fearful inside the Republican Party, and fear is a very powerful control hold. But don't forget that there's a Democratic Party, and I think it's laying low now. It's suffered in these elections, but there will be a resurgence. And at the moment, there's a campaign for the head of the Democratic National Committee. The problem is in the Democratic Party, there are also factions. There's a social democratic faction. There's a neoliberal faction. So how you reconcile and resolve those contradictions, I think, will be critical. So that's...
Katrina, of course, the Democratic Party has been defeated, that's clear. Generally, the left has been defeated in the broadest sense. What does that mean for resistance against Trump? How far does it make resistance against whatever Trump is planning to do and is doing much more difficult?
It is a much more difficult situation. But the left social democratic wing of the Democratic Party is already moving at state level. There is a politics where so much happens at the state level that in times of crisis at the federal level, there are governors who've already brought lawsuits, attorneys general brought lawsuits against violation of the 14th Amendment, the birthright executive action that Trump has brought. It is defensive now, but it will be a return to rebuilding a Democratic Party that has a social democratic wing, which I think is the winning. Bernie Sanders, who calls himself a democratic socialist, is in essence a New Deal 2.0. He's a social, if he was in Europe, he'd be a social democrat. So I think that politics is not gone. It's subsumed at state levels, city levels, and it will reemerge. And I think it's the fight to be bold and speak to people. And the fact that we were just talking about what's happening in Austria, let's not forget this is a global phenomenon. And the fact that we live in anti-system, anti-establishment times is something that the Democratic Party and other parties around the world have to grapple with.
The Democratic Party, as you said, is a party with many different currents. You mentioned the Social Democratic current, which has always been part of the Democratic Party, but a small part, not in the leadership at all. Bernie Sanders is a senator, quite well known. Also in Europe, he's well known. In how far does the balance sheet he draws for the reasons of the defeat correspond to a more general feeling in the left that the defeat was, in a certain way, the responsibility of the pro-business leadership of the Democratic Party, which is the pro-business leadership of the Democratic Party, which is probably a reason why it's such a big party. If it only would be a social democratic party, it would be much weaker, wouldn't it?
Well, I do think that President Biden, who has now left the scene, and I say that, left the scene, what he did, which was unregistered and untold, was he really did rebuild part of a social democratic economic framework. Bernie Sanders also has that, but let me say it's a very strong strand inside the Democratic Party, a new generation of leaders. The Progressive Caucus is the largest caucus in the House of Representatives, 100 people, and it is led by people across this country who are keen to build social democracy. We are in a weak place because I consider myself a social democrat, but at the same time, out of weakness, out of the, embers, bad maybe use of words, but the party will come back. And I think it will come back in the midterms, which are 2026. And I think it will be stronger for these fights inside. But we have to learn to speak to people in a way that is not kind of viewed as establishment on high. The Democratic Party, to some extent, has become the establishment party. And that is a very difficult thing to be in a time of anti-establishment, anti-system. But there are strong elements. I'm in New York City, there's a mayoral election, and there will be strong social democratic candidates. So I am not giving up. The resilience factor is important. I'm a realist, though. I'm a realist because I believe you got to live in the world as it is, but build for a different, and that road is very choppy.
Biden himself spoke often of the fight for the soul of the nation. Well, I don't know if there is only one soul of a nation. In America, probably there is always the soul of reckless capitalism. It's an important part of the American soul, as well as the soul, the readiness to challenge the powerful and to fight for civil rights. Biden wanted to have it both ways. Is the fight for the soul of the nation in the moment of such a polarization as we have it today? How can you do that? Is it the fight for a nation, for one nation? Is it not lost? Because there are very clearly two nations at least, if you want to say red states, blue states, and the big separation between these two visions of what America is supposed to be.
I think there are extremes in all parties. In MAGA, I think less so in the Democratic Party. But I think people want to be secure. I'm not sure about this opportunity, but people want security of healthcare, of jobs, of family. And also, they don't want United States to be a missionary crusader around the world. It's not isolationism to suggest that the United States would do better to rebuild its democracy at home as a signal to the world as opposed to endless war. I do think we are a polarized country, but let me advance one idea why. Inequality in this country has grown staggeringly. Under Biden, under Democrats, the attention hasn't been paid. What you saw at the inauguration was the looting of the republic. You saw the beginnings of an oligarchical state where you had the three richest men in the world given better seats than Congress people or electeds: Bezos, Musk, and Zuckerberg. And the fact that Trump and his wife are now in crypto investors, this has to be revealed as something that is not in the people's interests. And I do think the country's polarized partly because of the staggeringly growing inequality, which has been growing under both Democrats and Republicans. And that is a serious blight on the democracy of this country.
These billionaires in the court of Donald Trump, are they really something new? Because they were always an important place for big business in America, in the leadership of America.
It's always been, no question. But they are grafted in. They are part of the administration. Musk will have an office in the White House working on this government efficiency. They are meeting with Trump, and they are taking steps from Trump. The media we haven't talked about, but the fact that there have been capitulation on the part of several mainstream newspapers to Trump's wishes. or resolution of lawsuits, there is concern on the part of major media companies, which those three are part of, about regulation and about regulatory business in Washington. So there's a fear that goes beyond just criticism or what we have seen in the last decades. This is a new level of involvement of the oligarchs in an administration that is brazenly open about making money off campaigns and a president investing in his own crypto. The crypto world, I don't know how it's affected Austria, but it is it's a scam waiting to happen, where they want to put crypto money in the Federal Reserve, pension funds. I'm not opposed to technological advances, but I do see in Trump's foreign policy a throwback to the kind of 19th century Monroe Doctrine extractive colonialism.
Trump wants to expand the territory of the United States. That's something that we haven't heard, I think, since World War II. Do you see a readiness of the United States to embark on a new neo-imperialism course of expansion?
What, to go to Mars? To go to Mars? To go...
Mars is a bit far away, but maybe Panama is closer, or Greenland.
What I think, there is a real link between the new economy of the crypto, of AI, and the extractive policies, which are really at the heart of AI. You have to have the minerals, right? Cobalt, the other that are lying under the ground. So there's a neo-imperial kind of neo-colonial expansionism, which Trump is giving expression to. I don't think Americans are on board. I don't think it's popular. We'll see. It's so early because it's been less than a week, but people are already suggesting a little bit of concern about some of the policies, that they're moving so quickly. There's polling every day. I'm not saying, I think Trump is very smart to day one sign all these executive actions, however odious and anti-constitutional they are. But people like that activity, but when they look more closely, there will be some stepping back.
One of the important measures the administration has been announcing was to close borders and to deport millions of undocumented people in the US, which seems to be a huge operation and a big break with the American tradition to accept people from around the world. Can such a deportation still be prevented? Can it be prevented?
So let me first step back and suggest that the issue of immigration is a global. You know that in Austria, you see it in Germany. It's at the root of change in many of the upcoming elections, Germany particularly. There is a desire to make more coherent an immigration policy that has been never kind of resolved. But the cruelty of deportations from work, from schools, etc., I think tests the American character. My city, New York City, will be a sanctuary city. There are other cities where governors and mayors have already announced that. There will be confrontation, legal and other. But the resolution will not come with building these borders, these walls. It will come when there's a kind of reckoning with the fact, by the way, this is not going to be popular with business communities, where unlike Germany, I think there is a real shortage of labor in this country. There was an event many years ago called A Day Without Mexicans in Los Angeles, and the city came to a halt. Things didn't, so I'm just saying there's a balance between a coherent, sane immigration policy, which we do not have, and the cruelty of deporting kids, of deciding that birthright is unconstitutional when it is constitutional. This will be a real showdown to watch in the next weeks.
The immigration issue is a huge issue in Europe too. In Austria, it's one of the driving reasons why the far-right Freedom Party has won the last elections. But the clampdown against immigration, that is going to happen in the US. Is that accepted by the public? Is that something that the administration can say, okay, our society demands such a clampdown?
I think the images of children, families being divided has always turned Americans against cruel immigration policy. I do think even documented, even immigrants, Raymond, who've come to this country legally, are not necessarily in favor of undocumented immigrants. But I think the cruelty and the barbaric methods will turn people against. People voted. I mean, Donald Trump at his rallies spoke wrongly, factually wrong about the nature of the immigration class. But as you said, I mean, in Germany, there are new parties that have arisen as a result of the immigration issue. So I think it tests the character. This is a country of immigrants. I know that doesn't take you very far. Jared Kushner's family is a family of immigrants. I think one has to remember that while also working through the modern day challenges of the immigrant issue.
Katrina, what does this turn of the United States in the direction of the far right mean for the world? At the inauguration, we have seen a lot of far right representatives. There was also a representative from the Austrian Freedom Party sent by Herbert Kickl, who is the leader of the Austrian Freedom Party. But there were far right people from the United Kingdom, the president of Argentina, the prime minister of Italy. Is there something like a new far-right international being built now, based with a center in the White House?
So I love my country, my beleaguered country, but there are different Americas. This rise of the right wing, I call it sort of the Comintern. The right wing movement is not new. It's been growing, and it's more visible now because of Trump, but we've seen it around the world growing. I do think there are different Americas. And I think there was a woman who passed the day of the inauguration, Cecile Richards, who was head of Planned Parenthood, a great, great civic democratic figure. This is a moment. We've seen, listen, Reagan was right-wing. He was a happy man, smiled a lot, but the rolling back of the civilizing reforms that make this country America also started under Reagan. But this is more serious because so many of the institutions have been captured by the right. But we have to, on some level, it's important to be aware. And I think the establishment Democratic Party bears some responsibility for letting go of a working class that was the root of the party. Society has changed, but you need to address the fact that the Democratic Party has to decide what it is and has to bring in those who may not share all ideas, but come together to the first step will be overturning Trump. He cannot run again. He is a lame duck, which is interesting.
Because he cannot run again. Yeah, but he has a vice president who might take over any minute.
No, J.D. Vance is an interesting figure. I did TV with him years ago. I mean, he is truly a more philosophically right MAGA person. Now, let's be honest. Right-wing populism is not new. In our country, you had George Wallace, Pat Buchanan. You had Ross Perot to some extent. And to ground it for a moment, the nation around the NAFTA trade agreements opposed them, not because we oppose globalization, but we asked globalization for whom, for what, and so I think those trade deals are a policy root of some of what we're seeing, people feeling left behind in cities that are deindustrialized. There is a policy framework for the right-wing rise we're seeing. Do they have the answers? Do they have the answers? Are tariffs the answers?
Katrina, how do you characterize politically Trump and the Trumpistas? There has been a debate in during the election campaign if he's a fascist, if this is a fascist movement, and MAGA in many aspects looks like a fascist movement. How is your characterization?
So here's my concern in using the term fascism, which, by the way, the great scholar of fascism, Robert Paxton, finally decided what he was witnessing was, in fact, fascism. I think I see more of an American right-wing populism, that tradition. I also feel when you use the word fascism, you tend to throw it around without fully exploring what American fascism means. So I'm not sure a big MAGA voter would say I'm a fascist or understand that term, but we are seeing for sure the fusion of huge business interests with state interests, with government interests. So one could say it's fascist. Do I think that's politically wise? I think, let me just put it, I'm in a mode where I feel we understand who Trump is, the dangers, but what are the alternatives? What do we do now to counter or begin to better challenge the forces that are rising, not just in this country, but globally? What are the steps? What are the ideas? What are the organizing tools? And I think that's the focus of resilience, which is in the American character. Maybe easier to say sitting in New York City, but I've traveled. And I think people in the middle of Idaho care about some of the same things. You used to have great progressive senators in Idaho, Oklahoma, etc. What has happened to that? That's what interests me.
I mean, there is the authoritarian project of the leadership of the United States. There is a society that's very pluralistic, strong, with strong democratic traditions. How strong are the safeguards of the American society against a further trend in the direction of authoritarian rule, maybe dictatorship?
I think the civil society, so to speak, there are already lawsuits. There are groups around this country. The media is weakened, which is part of a civil society as well. But I think that the safeguards are weakened, but they exist. The amount of repression, and I use that word carefully, that may come down the pike and weaken those safeguards is still to be seen. We are in early stages of what could well be a deeply authoritarian project or a contested authoritarian project. But I think it's too early to tell. I think it's too early to tell. I do understand that there are good forces which will combat and contest, but it's early.
You say the media are weakened, the American media, the idea of free press, the idea of a press that has to control the powerful is very strong, and it is part of the tradition of journalism in the Western world. We have seen in authoritarian turned Hungary, authoritarian turned Poland and other countries that the media were cowed down, and in Hungary the media, the democratic, critical media are a very small part now of the media reality. How are the media weakened now? You mentioned that in the United States. The New York Times is powerful still, and the networks, TV networks, may want to compromise with power, but they are still normal journalistic projects, aren't they?
So I think there are different media now. The media landscape in this country is maybe confused, maybe hopeful. There are what young people listen to, read, TikTok, social media. There are new projects. The right-wing media is strong. What worries me is that the big media, where you saw the oligarchs inside the Capitol, those have business in Washington, regulatory business in front of agencies. And I think that leads to a preemptive capitulation sometimes, where they're careful now not to attack or not to do investigative reporting. A colleague of mine wrote a book during the Reagan era called On Bended Knee. It was about the media. This is, it's a danger because the media can be preemptively capitulationist. I think that people will turn to other media. I don't see overt repression. The danger is self-censorship. And I still think the bulwark, the buffers, the safeguards of media are in play. Again, we don't know. Will there be lawsuits? Will there be attacks on the media that make it even more difficult to report? But I know that journalists feel this is a time where they need to show courage. Can they do that in the big enterprises? Maybe not. But there are lots of investigative units around the country. I think of ProPublica. These are independent, and they're not part of a big cog. But I think, it's been tougher in Hungary, for example. I think Lauder. If one person buys up everything. It is scary, though, that the oligarchs have serious control of their networks. But there's a lot of resistance, I think, in the media, too. And not the kind of resistance, by the way, you're not going to see big marches like you did in 2016, 2017. This is a more focused, targeted, not in the streets kind of resistance.
How is your paper, The Nation, doing, and how do you see the function, the role of the nation in the upcoming new era in America?
So The Nation turns 160 this year. It's seen a lot. And it's doing well. I mean, we have a circulation print of about 125,000, 5 million viewers a month. But I think our role is to be independent, to be fearless, to be muckraking. I don't know if you know that, but to do the investigative journalism so that the voiceless can be heard, that there is always a testing of the powers that be, taking on the establishment. And I think we also are very involved with thinking through an alternative kind of security, which, by the way, I think of Kreisky and I think of Willy Brandt, I think of Olof Palme, the human security, which is so often relegated to the militarism, which is also defining this administration and others.
We could go on much longer, but our time is up. Thank you very much, Katrina vanden Heuvel. It was a pleasure to have you. Thank you for your time. Und ich verabschiede mich jetzt auch auf Deutsch. Bleiben Sie uns gewogen in komplizierten Zeiten. Informationen und weitere Analysen finden Sie auf den Internetseiten des Bruno Kreisky Forums, im Falter und natürlich auch im Fernsehsender W24. Ich darf mich verabschieden. Bis zur nächsten Folge.